This video is a really important video. We're going to go over the best Season 3 Warzone settings, and we're going to go through every single one of them, and we're going to go in detail on some of the new settings that have been added into the game, and it's going to allow you to get better performance out of your game as well, especially if you're struggling to hit higher frame rates. If you enjoy weapon comparisons, weapon stat breakdowns, and just overall tips and tricks for Warzone like this video that you're watching right now, don't forget to subscribe to the channel as we're trying to reach our goal of 10,000 subscribers, and also click that link in the description down below and subscribe to our second channel. We do make shorts on that channel as well as extra content. Now, I don't want to waste too much of your time because there is a lot of stuff we need to get through in this video, and there's some examples of stuff I want to show you as well. But we don't play on keyboard and mouse, so I'm going to skip all of this because I don't have a clue where to start with any of it. In terms of general, I am a controller player. Field of view I have set to 120. I just like it set to the highest possible so I can see everything on my screen. I know a lot of console players don't have access to this, but hopefully on the next gen consoles, we do get a Warzone update where you can get higher FOV. That would be amazing. I do use affected because this allows you to use the higher FOV even when you're aimed down sights. But if you struggle to see your opponents at those longer distances when you have the higher FOV, switch that to independent. Both are great options. It just depends on personal preference, really. Now, moving on to brightness. Now, I definitely think 65 brightness is the perfect brightness for Warzone, especially if you're not using any NVIDIA filters or anything like that. 65 brightness is definitely the best option. The rest of the HUD display and all that kind of stuff I just set to the default. I know a lot of people bring their HUD in a little bit, but personally I like it the way it is. In terms of subtitles, I have this as disabled, but you can have it enabled. It does tell you some important information even when you're in game, like if an enemy's dropping in or certain things like that. But I have a decent headset, so I can hear all those things regardless. Then for colorblind type, you do want to change this because it makes your game just look a lot nicer, and I will show examples of this in just a moment. But like I said, the colorblind type you definitely want to change. So the ones I would recommend are the last two options here. And then colorblind target I have set to both. Minimap, you have to have it square because you definitely see like 20% more on your minimap with it being square and not circle. Minimap rotation I have enabled. I have just this set to letters. And then the rest is all for FPS counters and text chat, so we don't really need to go and talk too much about that. Now what I want to show you is exactly what the colorblind settings do, as well as how the new map and the old map look different and how my settings come into this. So on the left, we have my settings set on the new map, and then on the right, I've took a screenshot of some of my old gameplay and how the exact same settings looked on the older map as well, which is just under the camera here a little bit. Now, if you look up on top of the staircase, now this is where I want to focus on. If you look up on the top of the staircase, with this new map, you can actually see much more. So if an enemy was coming down, you'd definitely be able to spot them on the new map with these settings. But if you look up here, this is going to be so difficult to spot a rose skin right up here with this exact same settings, but on the old map. So as you can see, it makes a huge difference now on this new map. Now, the next important setting is obviously the graphics settings. Now, console players won't have access to all of these. Only the very last couple of options you will have access to, but we'll discuss that when we get to it. When it comes to display mode, I use full screen borderless. It allows you to tab out of your application and go into other things. In terms of display adapter, you just want to have that set to default or your graphics card or whatever. Display resolution is whatever the resolution of your display is. That's what you should have it set to. Then for the aspect ratio, you can either have that set to exactly what your aspect ratio is or automatic. Both work fine. VSync, I have disabled, but you can have it enabled if you're struggling and you're getting a lot of screen tearing. Screen tearing is what you see on screen just now. So that image behind the camera or next to the camera, you can see that the kind of frame is kind of cut off down the middle, and this actually happens in game. So if you don't want that to happen, turn on VSync, it helps out a ton, but you do get less FPS off the back of that. Now, custom frame rate limit. Now, my game can go up to 120 FPS. Well, that's what my monitor can handle. So I have it set just a little bit above that just to make sure I can get the maximum FPS possible. Menu FPS I've set to 60 because you don't really need the huge FPSs inside the menus when you're just looking through your loadout or going through the settings. NVIDIA highlights I have set to disabled. I record on a separate computer. Reflex low latency for NVIDIA I have set to enabled. Now this is only the latency within your PC itself and within the graphics card. So it lowers the latency within your game, not over the internet, of course, because that's a completely separate thing. Then you want to make sure you always have the shaders installed, because otherwise your game just plays all really weird. I have this set to default. Streaming quality I have set to normal, just because I think this is the best. If you have it set to low, you don't really see enough detail in your game. Texture resolution, I think normal's perfectly fine. You can have this set to high if you want, but honestly, I don't think you can notice too much of a difference between high and normal in this game. I've tried both, and high doesn't really give you all extra detail. Anisotropic filter, I have set to normal. Particles, I have set to low. They don't really do anything besides make your game look nice, and that doesn't really matter all that much to me. Bullet impacts and sprays you need enabled so you know if enemies have been nearby. Tessellation, I've messed about a lot of these settings, and tessellation disabled works perfectly fine when I'm playing, so I don't really need this. I don't know anyone who would use this, but if it's just for like ground rubble and all that kind of stuff, I don't think this is really important. Shadow map I have set to normal. I think it's good enough for this game. You only need to know if a shadow is actually there. You don't really need to see like if your enemy's wearing a hat or something. It doesn't really matter too much. You can have it set to high if your graphics card's decent enough, and extra is just kind of overkill in my opinion. Cache spot shadows I have set to disabled. Sun shadows disabled. Particle lighting, again, this is just to make your game look nice. I have set to low. Ray tracing I have disabled. This will tank your FPS hard. This will make your FPS go from like 120 to like 90 FPS pretty quick. It's going to make your game look really nice. So if you're playing campaign or something, then sure, but other than that. Ambient occlusion I have set to disabled. Screen space reflections I have set to disabled. Filmic strength, now these are part of the console settings as well, so you want to make sure if you're a console player you're changing these settings as well. Filmic strength you want set to 0. You don't want any extra grain in your game whatsoever. DLSS is for PC only, but we'll come back to that in just a second. Anti-aliasing is for PC only, we'll come back to that in just a second. Depth of field now, you want that disabled. This is on console as well. It's going to give you a blurry background, and you do not need a blurry background, especially inside Warzone. There's a lot of other things in the game that make it hard enough to see as it is, so having that blur is not what you need. Motion blur, again, turn this off. You don't need any more blur. Weapon blur, you don't need this. Turn that off as well. Film grain, turn that off as well. You don't need that. And every other setting after this is for PC. Now, let's go back to DLSS. So DLSS is the new setting that came in with the Season 3 update, and what it does is it essentially renders your game at a lower resolution and then upscales your game so that you can get higher FPS. So let's say you want to play at 2K or you want to play at 4K, it will render your game at 1080p and then it'll upscale it so you're getting the higher FPS. Now, I'll quickly show you some examples of this, but the only two options you should be using for DLSS, especially if you're playing on a 1440p monitor or a 1080p monitor, the only two options you should be using is either disabled if your graphics card's good enough to get the best FPS that you want, and if you're not getting the FPS that you want, then quality is the only other option you should be using. Now, balanced, performance, and ultra performance all give you a hit to the quality of your in-game picture. So what you see in game, once you look at those slightly further distances, you'll notice that the game looks a bit blurry in the background, and you don't want that. Quality doesn't do it all that much. It still does it because it's going to upscale your game, but it doesn't do it as much. And then obviously disabled is just disabled as normal. So if you are struggling to hit FPS, then you want to go for quality. So what we have is a clip that I've made up of my in-game kind of performance. On the left is with DLSS off and all of my settings that I've just talked about. And then on the right is with DLSS on with that quality setting. Now, the two things you need to be looking out for here is the actual quality of the picture image, as well as the FPS counter, which I've made big so you can see what the FPS improvement is like. And straight away, as you can see on the screen here, I'm getting 104 frames in this intro cinematic with it off, and I'm getting 117 frames with it on. So if you're a single PC streamer or you just want extra FPS in your game and you have an RTX card, make sure you have this setting set to quality if you want the extra FPS. But we'll play this clip out so you can see what it looks like. So as you can see, I'm getting about 90, 100 FPS on the left, and I'm getting bang on 120 FPS constant in this intro cinematic on the right. So it does help out a ton, and as you can see, it doesn't really hurt your image quality all that much as well. Now this clip shows a little bit of everything actually, because if you see this final image of this helicopter, you can actually see that the helicopter right here has a yellow line for the propeller, but you cannot see that line on the DLSS on. So there is a trade-off of detail in your game, even when you set it to quality. Like I said, you just need to think about it as a trade-off. Would you rather have the higher FPS, or would you rather lose a little bit of detail in your game? That's completely up to yourself and going to depend on your hardware as well a little bit. Then we also have dynamic resolution. Now this is a weird one, and I would never really recommend doing this, because what this actually does is it's kind of similar to DLSS in a way that it upscales a lower resolution, but this does it constantly. So it's going to maybe render it at 1440p when it's at a good stable state in the game, and then it will render at 1080p, and it's just going to keep changing the resolution all the time, which is a bit weird. Whereas DLSS works a lot better in my opinion. So if you were having issues with performance, I would recommend using DLSS, not dynamic resolution. Then for audio settings, I have it set to boost low. I have music volume turned all the way down, and I use the hit marker sounds from the regular Modern Warfare. Everything else is kind of personal preference in my opinion, but I've been using boost low since the start of Warzone, and it's the perfect settings. Now for controller settings, now this is another important setting in my opinion. Button layout I have set to default. I have paddles on the back, and I wanted to use my analog stick once again for melee. I did use tactical even with the paddles, but like I said, I've just switched this back because I think it's much easier to melee with the analog stick, and I have paddles to do slide and jump. Then for these two settings, you don't want to touch these two. Dead zone, you need to figure out what the dead zone on your controller is, and then bump this up accordingly. This is going to be different for absolutely everyone. Horizontal and vertical stick, I highly recommend having this set to either 5, 6, or 7. You don't need to any higher or any lower than any of those three settings. Then for ADS sensitivity, I highly recommend playing around with this. Now 0.7 all the way up to 0.9 for low zoom is pretty much the sweet spot overall for Warzone. This is going to allow you to stay on target and make the guns feel like you don't have any recoil, especially if you're playing on controller. This is exactly what you need, because it's going to make it feel like you're sticking onto enemies. Then for high zoom, I have this set a little bit higher so you can swipe a little bit quicker when you have a sniper in your hand, but you can also set this the same as your low zoom as well. It's just personal preference, but like I said, if I've got a sniper, I do want to be able to move the scope around a little bit quicker. Aim response curve, I have set to dynamic. It allows you to snap onto different targets a little bit better. Vibration, you need to have this disabled because it puts you off if you're trying to win a gunfight and your controller's shaking all over the place. Now I'm going to quickly explain the aim assist settings to you. Personally, I use standard, but what you want to do is decide on your kind of playstyle. Now, for people who like to sit back and use an assault rifle at long range, precision and focusing are pretty much exactly the same setting, more or less. Give you a slower kind of slowdown, if that makes any sense, a stronger slowdown near your target if you're trying to get aim assist when you're aiming down sights. Now, standard doesn't give you as much of a slowdown, but you do get better hip fire accuracy kind of aim assist, if you want to call it that, which is called rotational aim assist. So standard's better if you're hip firing a lot. So if you're usually supporting your teammates from a distance. Scale aim assist with FOV, I have set this set to disabled. It's just what I've been used to. Weapon mount activation, I have this set to default. Weapon mount exit, I have set to enabled. Aim down sight behaviors hold. Equipment behaviors hold. Use and reload behavior, you want to have set to contextual tap. Depleted ammo switch, I have set to disabled because sometimes I want to run with the gun that I don't have any ammo in because I might move a little bit quicker with that weapon. Armor plate behavior, I have set to apply all. I think this is an amazing setting that you can use inside Warzone. Slide behavior, you need to have this set to tap, especially if you're not using a paddled controller. Auto move forward disabled. I use auto tac sprint, but I know some people don't actually like this setting. Vehicle camera recenter, I have set to enabled. I've been kind of playing around with this a little bit, and I kind of just go back to the default. And auto parachute deploy, I have set to disabled, which is really important. This is going to allow you to get to objectives and get to helicopters at the start of a game much quicker than your enemies. On top of that, you do need to keep in mind that you have this disabled because you will splat on the ground and make a pancake. But other than that, that is the best settings for Warzone Season 3. If you enjoyed this video and you liked us actually breaking down what these new settings actually do inside Warzone, don't forget to subscribe as we're trying to reach our goal of 10,000 subscribers. Also click that link in the description and subscribe to our second channel as well. And thank you very much for watching.